Welcome everyone to the third session of our first day conference on Anti-Caste Thought conference. We have two panelists with us. Our first panelist is Dr. S. Shakthi, who is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Madras. Shakti's work lies at the intersection of human geography and South Asian studies. Her current research examines labor, class, and gender dynamics in Chennai's information technology industry. Today, she is presenting a very interesting paper with a very fancy title, which is What is in a Fancy Name? The Many Faces of Caste in Chennai's Information Technology Industry. So we'll hear that from Shakthi. Second presenter is Dr. Jentle Varghese, who is an assistant professor in the Department of English, CMS College, Kottayam. And he has completed his PhD from the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad. His thesis is titled The Construction of Sadhu Janam, Ayyankali and the Struggle of the Slave Caste for a New Identity in Travancore in 1864 to 1941. Dr. Varghese has been working on the various struggles employed by Dalits to overcome caste oppression in colonial Kerala. He's presenting a paper on Militancy, Radical Democracy, and Constitutionalism, Ayyankali and the Dalit Assertion in Colonial Travancore. So we'll hear her after Shakti's presentation. So you both have, each presenter has 15 minutes. And after both the presentation, then I'll have my comments and then we'll open it for Q&A. So may I request Shakti first to go first?
Can everyone see the slides?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can.
Hi everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Gaurav. So I'll just get into it. So as I'm sure many of you know, on 30th June 2020, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing in the US filed a federal lawsuit against the information technology or IT company Cisco for failing to address caste-based discrimination in its San Jose office in Silicon Valley. This landmark case, which has since shifted to a California state trial court, can be traced back to 2016, when a Dalit employee of the company sought redressal from Cisco for targeted harassment by two Brahmin colleagues, Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kompella. Cisco's HR responded at the time that they did not recognize caste-based discrimination and were therefore unwilling to take any action, which is why it has now gone to court. With the potential to result in the formal institutional recognition of caste discrimination in the US, the Cisco case has become an anchor for wider political action by numerous anti-caste organizations, as well as providing a commentary on how, as Dr. Ambedkar has famously argued, migration can render caste a world problem. Now, in terms of my research, in considering the implications of the Cisco case, this paper moves away from the diasporic and draws linkages instead with the situated articulations of caste in the Indian IT industry. My own research on the IT industry in Chennai, while quite far removed in terms of physical distance from Silicon Valley, nevertheless connects in multiple ways to the events currently playing out in California. The details of the Cisco case underscore how caste oppression can take shape in corporate offices, both in the US but also in India, operating through tightly knit caste networks and both covert and explicit forms of harassment. Moreover, much like Indian migrants to the US, especially those in IT, The Indian IT industry has also been portrayed as being constituted largely of the so-called upper castes and Brahmins in particular in literature on the industry. Now, while it is undoubtedly true that in the US context, pre-existing social, cultural, and economic capital have resulted in a disproportionate representation of so-called upper caste groups in high-paying jobs, these characterizations can also obscure the experiences of other migrants who do not fit this dominant narrative, such as, for example, the Dalit Cisco employee who did report caste-based discrimination. This is also true for the IT sector in India, where I argue a more nuanced portrait of caste reinforcement and resistance is called for. Beyond reiterating that the industry is dominated by Brahmins, there has been relatively limited commentary, with some exceptions, on the operation of caste in the Indian IT industry. It should also be noted here that in the state of Tamil Nadu, as I said, where I did my research in Chennai, a history of progressive caste-based reservation policies and the removal in 2006 of the TNPCEE, a statewide engineering entrance exam, has to some extent opened up the industry in terms of caste. Although it could be said, and this is purely from anecdotal evidence, that this is more the case for junior positions, with management in these companies still belonging largely to the so-called upper castes. Still, in this paper, I try to unpack the many intersections between caste and the transnational market economy in an industry that is particularly characterized by the mobility of both capital and of workers. Now, just to give some context to this paper, the liberalization of the Indian economy in the early 1990s brought with it an array of new high-wage service economy jobs, perhaps epitomized by the rapid growth of the IT industry. These so-called modern forms of work, particularly in the private sector, were presented as being truly egalitarian. However, the oppressive logic of caste was in fact fundamental to how modernity itself was constituted, as Aloysius has argued, with upper casteness becoming the normative, if generally coded expression of how these institutions should function. And a number of empirical studies have demonstrated how the structures of the market economy do disadvantage marginalized castes, arguing persuasively that social mobility is, to quote Thorat and Newman, blocked by caste. Recent scholarship, which I attempt to contribute to through this paper, has paid particular attention to how caste hierarchies are reproduced in so-called elite spaces, including the mainstream media, higher education, and in academia. Now, closely linked to these arenas of so-called upper caste dominance is the ideology of merit, again, something that has got a lot of attention in scholarship. I should note that arguments talking about the casteist underpinnings of this term merit are in fact not new. E.V. Ramasamy Periyar himself has had critiqued the inadequacy of the term, highlighting that merit is an invention of the Brahmins to maintain their hegemony in spheres of influence and power. Yet the discourse of merit continues to be utilized, particularly as a bulwark against the progress offered by reservation policies, with reserved category students, again, as literature has shown, often being marked in various contexts as less meritorious, even long after they might have availed of reservation policies. This paper derives, adding to this literature, this paper derives from a larger qualitative study on class, gender, and labor formations in Chennai's IT industry, for which I used semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and analysis of documents, particularly those issued by the industry's National Trade Association, NASSCOM. I should clarify that by IT, I am referring primarily here to what is known as IT service work, which is software development and testing, and should be seen as distinct from ITES, so IT-enabled service work, such as call center work, data entry, or transcription. So my respondents who worked in the industry usually had at minimum a bachelor's degree in either engineering or science, with roles like HR being populated sometimes with people with degrees in other disciplines. Now, to ask the question, how does caste play out in this industry, which, as you can see, often likes to portray itself as being casteless? This was something I came across repeatedly, especially in conversations with executives in the industry. So rather than being discussed openly, caste is generally referred to by or subsumed under more euphemistic terms such as background or culture, which, as Jodhka and Newman have demonstrated, is itself a loaded term, that is background, that can function as a tool of exclusion for marginalized caste groups from more privileged spaces within the new economy. To give an example of how this plays out, I attended a large NASSCOM conference on diversity and inclusion. These conferences are held regularly, and diversity and inclusion, or DNI, is a big corporate goal in the IT industry, a term which is itself infused with neoliberal logic and is often balanced precariously with the industry's consistent championing of merit. At this conference, terms like background and culture were used repeatedly, and the only mention of the term caste itself was by an audience member. This is during a day-long conference. The only time I heard the word caste used was by an audience member during the Q&A portion of a panel discussion that comprised 4 Indian panelists, all executives at large companies, with what sounded like upper caste names, and 1 white panelist. The question on addressing caste inequality in the industry was followed by an uncomfortable silence in the large banquet hall of the 5-star hotel where the conference was being held. Finally, one of the panelists, after a long pause, responded with a speech about meritocracy, returning to another of the industry's favored lines when confronted with questions about caste diversity, that their aim is to meet, quote, targets, not quotas, simultaneously locating responsibility for addressing any inequality in terms of caste within the internal and hence private workings of individual companies, while also deriding reservations as impeding merit. The usage of euphemistic terms like culture in place of caste assumes a force that can obscure the social relation itself until the industry confidently claims castelessness. This is, as Deshpande has famously argued, one of the inherent privileges afforded by so-called upper caste status, allowing it to quote Deshpande, be completely overwritten by modern professional identities of choice. Yet the proclamation of castelessness cannot be equated with the absence of caste. The everydayness of so-called upper caste practices in the industry, observed in food, dialects, names, and through a variety of other markers, demonstrates how caste is, merely to quote MSS Pandian, transcoded onto other practices, rendering it caste by other means, again to quote MSS Pandian. And to give an example of this, and this is a reflection from one of my respondents who is not from so-called upper caste himself, as Murali, a software employee, reflected, all these Iyer boys will put a namam and come. This namam, that is the sort of ash on forehead, this namam romba velipadiya theridu. It is such an obvious thing. What they say is this is their culture, but this is not culture. They are showing that I am the dominating caste. In displaying to the rest of the workforce that they are the dominating caste, we can observe Murali's own reading of social dynamics in the industry that underscores how culture becomes a proxy for caste inequality, something that Bal Murali Natarajan has argued. The industry's insistence that it has somehow transcended caste is therefore disrupted constantly by the actual functioning of caste on the office floor, which I found through other narratives from respondents. At times, this is brought out even more explicitly, such as in 2017, when the then Infosys CEO Vishal Sikka proudly called himself a Kshatriya warrior. Now, the material implications of these maneuvers, they were brought out in my conversation with Neeraja, who was an executive at a small IT company. Neeraja referred to our caste simply as a backward community. This is how she defined her own caste status. She proceeded to then tell me about her experiences with casteism in the industry. As she said, and this is an exchange here that I've quoted at length, Neeraja says, generally there is preference for one particular community. It's not been a major problem for me, but I felt at times that this is playing a role somewhere, sometimes. So I asked, has it ever affected you personally in terms of promotions? And she said, yes. In fact, one of the reasons why I decided to move out of my previous organization is primarily because I felt I was not given the opportunities I wanted to get, and they were kind of trying to stereotype me. So I said, it's interesting because they're not technically supposed to know what your caste is. And she said, but they would know that I'm not of that community, so they may not accept me, right? While Nidra did not refer explicitly to Brahmins during our conversation, the reference to that community was clear. Thus, we can see the deployment of caste in myriad ways within the IT office indicates that caste has by no means ceased to exist as much as this is the narrative the industry itself foregrounds, but manifests in a number of different ways. Now, I want to turn to a particular incident, which is actually what resulted in the title of this paper itself, the PayPal incident at the Chennai office of the company PayPal, a large American financial technology company. And this was recounted to me by two of my interlocutors. Again, all these names are pseudonyms. I call them Kamala and Wasim. Both of them were former IT employees. Kamala had, in fact, been an employee of PayPal in 2011 in the Chennai office at the time of this incident, which did get some press coverage as well at the time. Kamala was also one of the founding members of an IT union in the city and an activist in an IT employees collective called Ilantamragam or Young Tamil Nadu, a group influenced by the anti-caste principles put forward by Periyar. Wasim began to narrate what had happened at PayPal. And you can see the exchange on the slide. I'm not going to read it out because keeping attention to time. But as they explained, employees at the company were assigned to different teams for the company's annual day celebration, which were meant to represent different states in India. But these groups were actually assigned names such as Banerjees of Bengal and Iyyars of Tamil Nadu, which corresponded to dominant caste groups in each of these regions. Kamala took this up with HR at the company, who, as she said, didn't understand at all at the HR level. They just said it's a fancy name. So this is Kamala's recollection of what happened. So Kamala and Ilantamragam, that is the IT union, the IT employee collective, staged a protest outside PayPal's office because the company's management continued to be mostly unresponsive. And eventually the company did issue an apology letter and dropped any explicit mention of caste from team names. However, things did not end there. As Kamala explained, the theme of the annual day event was weddings from different states, but even without the mention of caste names, the marriage rituals on display reflected those of castes like Tamil Brahmins. We can observe from Kamala's recollections that the distinct rituals of Tamil Brahmin weddings were portrayed by her former company as being representative of Tamil society more generally. The transmission of castelessness has therefore allowed members of the so-called upper caste to appear ignorant about the insidiousness of caste and the extent of their privilege in this context. Even as such incidents might be dismissed by management as superficial and without significance to the material realities of the office, they are indicative of the hegemony of oppressor caste groups in these sites of relative privilege. We can observe that the private or cultural, interpreted in marriage rituals or caste names, and the public materiality of the workplace are not separate entities through this incident, but are in fact interwoven. And perhaps the ultimate act of caste dominance displayed in this particular incident is the usage of caste names or fancy names for teams, because rather than simply displaying caste through other means, as again going back to M.S.S. Pandian, we can see how caste names themselves become these other means. So just to quickly conclude, as calls for private sector reservation are consistently pushed aside by IT industry leaders who champion the ideology of merit, we see this existing alongside numerous overt and more subtle displays of caste dominance within the industry, creating slippages in the narrative of having transcended caste. Moreover, the Indian IT industry does not exist in isolation, but links in many ways to the transnational knowledge economy, as it's called, with implications for the operation of caste in the diaspora as well. You should note here that both the Dalit engineer and the two Brahmin engineers at Cisco were all students at IIT Bombay, which is a feeder organization for IT companies in Silicon Valley and also for the Indian IT industry. The mobility of IT workers from India who travel abroad for short projects, and the fact that many long-term IT workers, like the ones at Cisco in this case, many long-term IT workers abroad are first-generation adult immigrants, means that an analysis of the mobility of caste as contextually informed is important. Moreover, as I've tried to highlight, the production of a homogeneous upper casteness serves as yet another form of upper caste assertion. Even as the industry continues to be dominated by these oppressor castes, the presence of employees from a broader range of caste backgrounds must also be taken into account, as I've tried to do in this paper, in analyzing the relational articulations of caste within the new economy. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakthi. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. And thank you for being on time. Now we move to Dr. Jentle Varghese. Varghese, to you.
Thank you. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, my presentation is titled Militancy, Radical Democracy and Constitutionalism, Ayyankali and the Dalit Assertion in Colonial Travancore. In this presentation, I'll be looking at the various strategies employed by Dalits to overcome caste oppression in colonial Travancore and South India. I'll be doing this by closely reading some of the activities of Ayyankali, the first Dalit leader in Kerala, and the movement established by him called Sadhu Jana Paripalana Sangham, which means the Association for the Protection of the Poor, in short as Sgpas. Ayyankali was born in 1863 in an ex-slave untouchable Puliya caste, and he has been instrumental in challenging the caste-imposed restrictions on Dalits to travel on public roads, attending schools, and dressing neat and clean. Ayyankali's life and times are emblematic of the transformation that had taken place in the Travancore society, the early 20th century. The struggles and claims of Dalits led to a radical configuration of the society and its modernization. In this process, Dalits emerged as historical agents, not the passive spectators of social change. He began his activities through militant activism. He was transformed into a radical democrat and a constitutionalist and emerged as the greatest Dalit icon in contemporary Kerala. Travancore was a Hindu state ruled according to Dharma Shastras. Untouchability and distance pollution prevailed, and the untouchable castes such as Parayas, and Kauravas were agnostic slaves, and they were bought and sold in the slave markets. The arrival of the British colonialism and the missionary activities broke down all the social order. By the end of the 19th century, the social situation of Travancore changed drastically, and Ayyankali emerged as the leader of Dalits in such a context. What were the strategies employed by Dalits to challenge these oppressive conditions? As the pioneer of Dalit assertion in Travancore, Ayyankali judiciously used a variety of strategies to challenge caste oppression. They were militancy, radical democracy, constitutional methods, and of course negotiations. According to his biographers, Ayyankali's militant struggle against caste oppression started in 1893. In this year, he forcibly rode a bullock cart through the public road in Venganur, his native place, enraging the Nayars, the dominant caste, who tried to stop him. This led to confrontations in different parts of Venganur. In 1896, he marched towards the market in Balaramapuram, which is close to his native place. When they reached Chaliyathu near the market, they were stopped by the Nayars and other dominant castes. A violent clash erupted there between the two groups. In 1912, Ayyankali forcibly entered the market in Nedumangadu with his men, and this also led to violent confrontations. So these events necessitate the discussion of the important aspects of Ayyankali's early activism and the nature of Travancore society in the last decade of the 19th century. Dalits were not allowed to access the public spaces like the roads, schools, courts, and the markets. In this sense, it shows the limited sense of the idea of public spaces in Travancore. The early stages of activism, Ayyankali believed that the way to achieve the basic rights is to use militancy. In fact, there were no other means available since he was the first to seriously think about the disabilities faced by Dalits. As he had a strong physique and trained in the martial arts, There is no wonder he thought that rights could be achieved through physical strength. He trained a group of young Dalits who were called Ayyankali Pada, which is Ayyankali's army. In every step, they had to face severe oppositions from the Nayars and other dominant castes. Every attempt of Ayyankali and his men resulted in confrontation. We could see in this stage, he acted spontaneously. He felt that keeping away his community from the public spaces is not acceptable. So he tried to claim these spaces through force. In fact, his struggle was against the prevailing customs, but the agents of social control felt the necessity to maintain the status quo. And they immediately intervened and tried to contain the aspirations of Dalits. Ayyankali's claims on the roads, markets, and schools created a moral panic in the Nayars and other dominant castes in Travancore. They felt their privileges in the caste society were under siege. They expressed this through frequent rioting, assaulting Dalits, burning the schools and houses of Dalits. And this is how Ayyankali used militants. We should keep in mind that Ayyankali never advocated violence. It was only for realizing the rights of his people. It was only for resisting the onslaughts of other communities on his people. And another important aspect of Ayyankali's movement is the radical democratic phase. Through his militant activism, Ayyankali emerged as an unquestionable leader of Dalits in Travancore. He established the first Dalit movement in Kerala called Sadhu Jana Paripalana Sangham in 1904 in order to further his activities. It was envisaged as a movement for the various ex-slave castes, that is Pulyas, Parayas, and Kauravas, who shared the experiences of slavery and untouchability. Rejecting the caste and religious identities, Ayyankali tried to construct a new community identity through the activities of Sgpas. This new identity rejected the caste-imposed identities like slaves and untouchables and was not related to any religion, neither Christian nor Hindu. This new identity of Sadhujana, that means the poor people, brought together various ex-slave castes. The struggles helped form a community feeling, and they realized the common needs and aspirations of the community. For the first time in history, Dalits in Travancore came together and discussed their problems and demanded and claimed their rights. W.S. Hunt, a CMS missionary stationed at Central Travancore, observed in the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century, like this: the primary purpose of the society is, so he's referring to Sgpas, as its name implies, to help the depressed, to help themselves, to stimulate them to raise themselves out of their age-long depression and degradation, to make them realize that they are men and not chattels or clods. But it goes further. It teaches them that they have rights and that if they boldly claim them, those rights must be granted. Its claims do not stop short of absolute equality of opportunity with other castes, plus certain privileges to make up for past and present disadvantages. The success of the Tiyas in raising their community by means of a society no doubt stimulated the organizers of the society who have also known themselves acquainted with Western methods of agitation. Ayyankali's activities, therefore, had the necessary contents which could attract all Dalits. Sgpas was a modern organization in all aspects. It had a bylaw, democratically elected leadership, branches, agenda, protest, etc. When we analyze the activities of Sgpas, we have to look at the agenda of Sgpas. Education had been central to the activities of Sgpas. All the seemingly simple things should be understood in the context of the caste society of Travancore. The demands were radical because they were not allowed to access any of this. Rejecting the caste identity was radical. Rejecting religious identity was radical. Addressing themselves as sadhujanam was radical. Demanding education was radical, and rejecting the caste markers was radical. Ayyankali demanded the extension of every right to everyone. That makes him an advocate of radical democracy. Another important aspect of Ayyankali's political activism was the reliance on constitutional methods. This is important in the sense that by that time he had emerged as a significant figure in the Travancore society. He petitioned the authorities and waited for the result. A petition was submitted to the Diwan and the Director of Education requesting the permission to admit Dalit children in schools. This was allowed and an order was issued in 1907, but the upper caste officials did not let it happen. The Travancore Education Code of 1910 was the result of Ayyankali's incessant interventions and petitions. This settled the issue of Dalits' admission in government schools by clearly stating that no pupil shall be denied admission to any school on the ground that he belongs to any caste or class or religion. The school officials in various places did not admit Dalit children in schools. This ultimately led to the riots in Urutambalam in 1940. Travancore had a legislative assembly called Srimulam Popular Legislative Assembly. In 1911, Ayyankali was nominated to the assembly. He continued as a member for 20 years until 1932. Ayyankali raised the basic issues of his community throughout his tenure in the assembly. Land, education, and jobs for the educated were his major demands. In the cases of land, he demanded free registration, wastelands to be assigned to his community, etc. Even after getting land assigned, he had to fight to get it registered. But most of the officials were not as progressive as the Diwan of Travancore, and they were against the social race of Dalits. Another important aspect of Ayyankali is the negotiating skills. So he negotiated with the state, the upper caste leaders, the government officials, and maintained close relations with all of them. The Diwan of Travancore was a constant presence in all the meetings of Sgpas. The annual meetings of Sgpas at Victoria Jubilee Town Hall clearly shows Ayyankali's relationship with the higher officials of the state of Travancore. Now let us look at an incident that shows Ayyankali's strategies and ability of negotiation to end a riot between Dalits and Nayars. Dalit women were not allowed to cover their upper part of the body, and they were forced to wear a garland made of stones called kallamalas. Kallamalas functioned as caste markers. Ayyankali campaigned against this in his native place, Venganur, and succeeded. By 1915, the women of Venganur had already discarded kallamalas and started wearing jackets. Gopaladasan, the secretary of Sgpas in Kollam, started campaign against the kallamalas, and this led to a very huge riot. And Ayyankali negotiated here. Ayyankali, after the riot, in which thousands of houses were burned, Ayyankali planned to hold a reconciliation meeting, but the Diwan rejected permission, stating that such a meeting would make the situation worse. The police inspector, this meeting was an excellent example of Ayyankali's strategic plan. He requested his friend, a progressive Nayar, and also the president of the Nayar Service Society to preside over the meeting. He had also invited the government officials, including the chief secretary of Travancore, to attend the meeting. It was in their presence Ayyankali requested the Nayar gentlemen to grant permission to discard kallamalas in front of the great gathering. The president agreed, and Ayyankali called a woman to come forward to the dais and discard the kallamalas. Every woman present there came forward and discarded their kallamalas, and there emerged a pile of kallamalas, the stone garlands. So this Ayyankali achieved two things. One, ended a massive riot and brought back normalcy. Second, he succeeded in convincing the society that forcing Dalit women to wear kallamalas is a denial of their rights, and also convinced the Dalit women that carding kalamalas and dressing neatly and presenting themselves in public neat and clean is their right. So I'm concluding. So I have attempted to analyze various ways in which Dalits in colonial Travancore negotiated caste oppression. So reading some of the activities, this paper argued that Ayyankali strategically used militancy, constitutional methods, radical democracy in negotiations to achieve the rights of his people. Yeah. He raised the issues of the legislative assembly and through various agencies of state, and most important them is the presence in Travancore Legislative Assembly. He raised the issues that required immediate intervention of the state, and we could see many of them took a long time to realize because the uninterested government officials who belong to the upper caste communities. Ayyankali's use of these modern ideas and methods and the results he achieved through this makes him the greatest Dalit leader Kerala has ever produced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jentle. And we'll have Q&A after this. So let me just come to first start with Dr. Shakti's paper. And so Shakti, your paper, first of all, brilliant presentation. So your paper dealt with many issues of from I would say it's also dealing with an issue of representation when you're focusing on the issues of merit and how it plays out in the internal mechanism of IT industry. And it discusses the micro processes of everyday practices, while dealing with, as you give an example of food, language, and dialect, and different kind of rituals. So I think by examining this caste dynamics in the IT industry, your paper, your study contributes how this operation operates within these kind of elite spaces, and also highlights that how the public spaces or the elite spaces are produced and reproduced by caste hierarchies, including mainstream media, IT industry, and education and academia. You touched upon many of these things while giving your ethnographic data. And another aspect that you touched upon was the politics and rhetoric of merit that, it goes against also the ideal notion of reservation that we have. But in reality, with this reserved category students, they are often being marked as less meritorious. And the paper very strategically highlights these through the data, that how IT sector has become now IT caste. The word IT caste used, I think it's a very good terminology to use it. But one of the questions that I have is like, of course, now when you look at the modern 21st century India, the idea of or the impact or the adverse impact of neoliberal policies, you can see all around India, but especially when it comes to Tamil Nadu, which actually historically, which has been maintaining a significant number of OBC reservation policies that have been implemented historically. Why, even after, despite all these efforts of social justice, why then the Tamil Nadu society is unable to tackle the caste realities because Tamil Nadu has kind of makes a very interesting case when it comes to reservation. So this is, I think, a broader question that I want to pose. And it also shows that it is not about the merit and representation, but there are these deeper structures of culture, and which I also in my research calls it that this is the caste culture that is often ignored by the scholars, and even from the very conservative Marxist scholar also highlight that they kind of ignore. And when you were dealing with the issue of culture, you quoting Balmurli and Aloysius, I personally take more side of Aloysius, where this argument, which he makes it very powerful, that what is this complexity of culture and caste? Of course, caste is omnipresent and disguised in the modern time, and that's what you try to highlight, that how it plays out institutionally. And you did that in a very great way when you say Brahmin slang and culture and symbolic, and why it's a very interesting way to look at these processes, that how in your paper you mentioned how people figure out by touching shoulders whether one is wearing sacred thread, what you call the punal or not. Now, these are actually, and other things also you mentioned about slangs and all, these are the caste markers and also caste symbols. And in other words, that it comes under this whole arena of culture that we generally don't try to unfold. And that's where I would say that when you look from the intersectionality point of view, where you see that caste and patriarchy, that how it goes hand in hand. For example, in the one thing is that in terms of caste marker, caste symbol, so where you look at these, that how it functions. But like, for example, when you, and it's the duty of researcher, it's a kind of responsibility of researcher as well, doesn't matter which background we come from, but it is our responsibility to dig deeper, because when we read Ambedkar, he said we have to hit the caste and patriarchy at the same time. You can't do just one or the other. So as a researcher, when we're interviewing women, I have not come across any research which actually asks these questions to women, saying, why is it, what do upper caste women think? That why is it that only men wear the sacred thread? Why don't women wear the sacred thread? And then you, in a way, understand their perspective on, in other words, that how it is basically what I'm trying to say, that these are like two solid structures that we need to kind of unfold. In the same way, when you're talking about how the process is inside institution about caste passing, that is also another area that I think will be beautifully highlighted. And so the final thing is about caste and class. And I want to again go back to the Pandian and Aloysius argument here, that how the private or the cultural interpretation here in terms of these rituals and caste names, that how it is not, they said the public materiality of workplace are not the separate entities, but they are interwoven. So here, your paper actually very interestingly present this complexity of caste, class, and gender. Right? And within this changing the phenomena with this whole in wake of everyone is getting education, or becoming part of higher education. Now, one thing actually, while reading your paper, it again, because we, most of the scholars don't talk about culture in this sense, they quickly jump to criticize it. But I think when you look at the culture from Stuart Hall's point of view, and where he says about encoding and decoding, this is actually, that's what actually you were trying to do, that how this process of encoding, where you, it's kind of message will be encoded partially depending on the purpose of the message. So decoding of a message is how, look at it like that, how Stuart Hall explains it. And so this kind of communication that happens, because one of the issues that your paper was kind of the microprocesses that it was highlighting, I think that Stuart Hall's idea of encoding, decoding would explain it clearly. And again, going back to the culture, that you mentioned about the sacred thread in Geneva, what you call. So you can't get rid of this sacred thread until you decode the hidden meaning behind it. Right, and we have not done that. I have not seen any study of these, so that's why I'm very skeptical of when people actually don't say or criticize caste as culture. It is a culture of caste that we need to look at, and it's a caste culture that we live and breathe, we live in and or breathe in. Have you seen that this Netflix series on matchmaking? Right here, it actually presents this all about the class and caste, and that how these dynamics plays out, and no one actually ever challenged these structures. So in a way, it's a kind of a stand one take in with this perspective, with this goal of with the annihilation of caste, with the anti-caste stand in mind. So. It is not, and I think many of these things that you have done, my only suggestion is that you can use the intersectionality approach, where bring caste to gender and is changing dynamics in the 21st century, and that manifests very well in the IT industry. I'm not sure about many other industries that are around, but IT industry is kind of is the best site to study all these dynamics and changing sides. So I have some other question, but I'll leave it for now here. Yeah, it also shows, in the last point, it also shows that identity also are undergoing a complete transformation, and it's transcending from time and space. And now I think one of the respondent of yours was trying to, were actually in the name of, in the process of caste passing. And that shows that one can actually, these interesting processes, these micro processes, tells us that how society is changing with education and with socioeconomic mobility, but at the same time, that how the upper caste has devised a new language to deal with these changing dynamics. They know how to deal with it. So that also, I think, aspect should come in the paper, and look at their verbatives very critically, and kind of maybe explore them again further to make a good argument, which would be a cultural argument to prove your point. Okay, so I have sent I have written some point that I'll send you now. Coming to Dr. Varghese paper, and paper deals with the question of how Dalit negotiate and caste oppression, negotiate the caste oppression in Travancore in the late 19th and early 20th century. So you have mentioned that how Ayyankalis employed these different strategies to deal with oppressive caste society, and how one theme that I was also very impressed with the way you put that how Ayyankali used strategically used this whole idea or notion of negotiation. So Ayyankali's to me was his conception of inclusive modernity, that it's also coming on a kind of a very some scholars use the word Dalit argumentative sphere, which is kind of in very, very visible in modern education and material deliberation. And for a long time, historians in Kerala positioned Ayyankali not as a Dalit leader, but as a belligerent peasant leader in micro region with a limited vision. So I think when you start your paper about Ayyankali, do mention that I see that literature was kind of not coming in the scene, that what actually, how scholars defined him, previous scholars or studies have defined him. One of the aspect of Ayyankali's social activism, and even later phase, even I think you will also get some question on Ayodhya Das, and in previous panel also people were discussing that. I think education has been a very central, to the activities of most of these Dalit struggle, and they are understood in this society. But again, when you were mentioning that, some of the references needs to be to put on. second point that Ayyankali's political activism was his reliance on the very democratic method that he used. And I felt that in the most of the writings on Ayyankali, that aspect also was not highlighted properly, than the way he used and his ability, and because he was actually having this all relying on democratic method, that gave him a kind of a strength or a capacity, ability to solve problems and achieve his target through negotiation. And now negotiation is a very there's so much on negotiation, that how negotiation happens, and especially in that time, in that particular structure that he is dealing with. So in that context, now think of negotiation and then say the greatest challenge before Ayyankali was to bring back these Pulayas and restore peace in the region, the Pulayas who were fled from the region. So this was one of the thing that actually, when you talk about Ayyankali, so there are many classical examples of Ayyankali's politics of negotiation to achieve the rights of his community and solving problems. So I would suggest that bring some of those examples, and they might go in footnote, but bring those examples to show his ability and skills that he had. Through I think by this process of negotiation, he achieved two things that I think what I understood from the literature. That one is that he ended the massive riot and brought back normalcy, and succeeded in convincing the society that forcing Dalit women to wear and kalamalas in denial of their rights, and convincing the Dalit women that discarding kalamalas and dressing neatly and presenting them in the public neat and clean is their right. So I think you were discussing another case of where about women, where women were not allowed to wear anything. So with this early, I think the focus of your paper, which is where early militant phase that emerged in this context, and you're kind of focus more on things. But I think to me, Ayyankali should be remembered as one of the most influential anti-caste activists who actually effectively challenged caste-based restriction in education, public spaces, and social interaction. So I think if three themes, if you can actually clearly highlight, that would kind of serve the whole purpose of all these restrictions, caste-based restriction in education, public spaces, and social interaction. And then there are many examples I have written down. I'll share with you in the thing. So then a question I have for you, that unlike Ayyankali, who brought the idea of religious conversion to the center of caste discourse, Ayyankali did not recognize conversion as the primary instrumental or instrument of social emancipation in that time. And I think in the previous panel also, my friend Malini was also raising this question, that what's the significance of conversion in the contemporary, in the modern time. But when you compare Ayyankali and Ayyankali, so just look at this question also of conversion, that what is Ayyankali's idea and why didn't he go for that? And Ayyankali's imagination about modern education, his rational approach to create a non-agricultural Dalits who would be instrumental in dismantling the land-based exploitation in Travancore and beyond. So I think that is one aspect that I was thinking when you look at the part of negotiation. That was another aspect you can add. So non-agricultural Dalits. That's I think one of the reading I've done I can share with you. So good. So that's all for now. Let me hear so some of the questions that you can So can you see, Jentle, some of these questions?
Gaurav, can I say, please look at your chat. The questions are there for you.
Yes, I'm looking at the chat. So, okay, so now so this is the question for Shakthi. So, so someone, one question is that, one of my known colleagues faced the similar incident that you mentioned in your paper, and he was university topper in math. He belongs to backward community. Once after arrival of new HR, he placed without assignment. After 2 months, they removed him by citing bench status. This is how they try to displace in order to adjust their non-community. The question is how to highlight such situation since merit is at bench. So the question is kind of, I'm also not getting the question. Let me go to the second question. How do you see liberalization and its focus on individualism affecting corporate culture and the idea of merit versus vis-a-vis the caste question? So idea of merit vis-a-vis caste question, how it is affecting. So this is one. Another question, Shakthi, if you can, I think, answer. This is another one related to the same idea of merit. That is the caste imbued social milieu. It should be no surprise if discrimination and exclusion of SCs, along with simultaneously passive inclusion of forward caste, continues in the private sector of contemporary India. What is the reason behind it? So, and yes. So you want to answer two of them, then I have another one after this.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to answer these questions. I think some of these are quite big questions, but I'll try my best to answer them. In terms of the first question about the bench, I mean, I think I have understood the question. The bench is basically in the IT industry, often employees who are not assigned to projects. It's a very project-driven industry. So and usually these projects will come often from foreign clients, sometimes domestic, but it's also an industry that's very reliant on foreign clients. And, employees will be assigned to different, usually short-term projects. So if someone is not assigned to a project, they're put on the bench, which is basically when you're waiting to be assigned to a project. I think this question is saying this particular person was put on the bench for 2 months, even though they were perfectly qualified to work on a project. And then the new HR came in and said, since you've been on the bench for so long, I need to let you go, which I can, I mean, I have heard similar stories in the industry. I think this is also certainly about caste and identity, but also about the structure of the IT industry itself, which is increasingly moving towards what they call flexibilization, but a great amount of insecurity for IT workers. Although, of course, IT workers generally do earn, much higher salaries than most of the Indian workforce. And do live more comfortable lives. Nevertheless, there is increasingly a lot of contingency, insecurity, mass layoffs that are happening, which has only been exacerbated by something like COVID-19. So this is something that's really characterizing this industry, and it I think feed the broader culture of the industry as well, where there's more and more focus on contract-based work and less on having permanent employees. All this, I think, adds to that insecurity. And I think we can also read, perhaps, although I haven't done that in this paper specifically, but try and read some of those practices through a caste lens as well, definitely. Which I think is maybe what the question was asking about. The other two questions, I mean, again, the question of the dominance of FCs in the private sector, it's as I said, a big question. I think there's scholarship by others like, again, Surinder Jodhka and Catherine Newman's work is to me was very enlightening on some of these processes, where they interviewed HR managers and I think this also goes to the previous question about this individualism and all that, and saying that the individual's ability is what we will foreground as a company. But then when you read that paper by Jyotika Newman, where they talk to and they slowly pick apart how going from this language of merit and individualism, ideas of group identity start to come into the language that HR managers use in these interviews. Stereotypes are very common that exist about different caste groups, people from different regions in India. And these sort of seep into the language that HR managers use. And so I think this question of individualism needs to be seen in that context. I heard a lot about language-based affinities, where people would say, you speak 2 words in, say, a particular language, whether it is Tamil or Hindi or Telugu, whatever it is, and your manager who speaks the same language would then choose you for the project and not someone else, was something that my respondents used to talk about a lot. This idea that in fact group identities do play a role. And I think, again, this is definitely something that we can also apply to this idea of merit and caste, because I think what I try to bring out in the paper is that as much as this language of individualism is used, that can often be a cover for practices that are in fact privileging certain groups. And in terms of the other question, yeah, I mean, in the and I think this also, you were asking about, again, why is there still sort of some amount of inequality in Tamil society, even though there's been OBC reservation. I think that was also your question, Gaurav. So, again, I think there are probably people here who are better placed to answer that than me, attending this conference, who do more work in this area. But I do want to emphasize that what I did here was that there is greater caste diversity in Chennai's IT industry than perhaps we've seen being reported on when we look at like the IT industry in Bangalore. And this is, I'm drawing on secondary literature on, spaces like the IT industry in Bangalore, which has been often portrayed as being quite homogenous in terms of caste. What I heard was that there is at least at the entry level greater representation of more caste groups in Chennai's IT industry. This is because although IT employees are very mobile, they will move to different cities or different countries for work. So especially in smaller companies or mid-sized companies, people might tend to remain in the same state where they grew up and studied. So you will often find that in Chennai, especially in the slightly smaller or mid-sized companies, there are a lot of Tamil-speaking employees or employees from states nearby, and they will, again, anecdotally what I've heard, come from a broader range of caste backgrounds. Although, as I said, this is not, I don't know if it's really translated into greater caste representation in the managerial or executive position. So I think that is something to keep in mind, that these policies, I wouldn't say that they've had no impact. I think that they have sort of done something to bring in a greater diversity of caste groups, but of course more can certainly be done. And I don't know.
Let me. I'm just stopping here because the time. But there are questions that actually you can think of. There are one question about what's the data on Dalits in IT industry, and a very interesting question, which is about that how. And it's kind of, again, what I also raised, but here it's, he beautifully put it, that how Brahmins are only 3% minority in Tamil Nadu, but they are kind of, representing almost every sector. So the question is said, how do you explain this success of Brahmins group in all the public sectors, including the political parties and IT industry? So I think this, you can think of this question, and I'm sorry that we don't have time to discuss. I'm going to yeah. So, and there's also a question of caste census that is also one you can, but it's again broader question. I am just moving on to now genders, and there is this the question on. He said, Ayyankali struggle reconceptualized public for the Malayali. Where do you place him in our understanding the region? One. And the second is that about, sorry. And second in my question, actually, that Jentle, if you can ask about the conversion and comparing it with Ayodhya's idea of conversion, is that. And one more question: how have the leaders of Kerala left, like EMS, for instance, approached Ayyankali? How do leaders of Kerala approach Ayyankali? Is there a consideration of his legacy by the Kerala left? I think very ideological question that, good. So basically three questions. One is about his comparison with Ayodhyadas, and second, how do you place him in notion of modern Kerala, and his legacy? How is there a consideration of his legacy by the Kerala left? Jentle.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments, critical comments. Let me begin with his idea of religion. Why Ayyankali did not use religion as a means of emancipation. So the important point is that Ayyankali lived in South Travancore, Southern Travancore. So the London Missionary Society started working in Southern Travancore in 1806. In Church Mission Society, CMS, started functioning in Travancore, especially Central and Northern Travancore, in 1816. And if you look at the converts, the early converts of CMS and LMS, you would see that majority of them belong to the Dalit communities, Pulayas, Parayas, and Kauravas. Okay, Ayyankali was Pulaya, and some of the family members, like his uncle or some people, had also converted into Christianity. For example, there is a person called Thomas Vadyar, who was with Ayyankali for establishing the Sadhjana Paribalana Sangh. He was a Christian convert, and majority of the people who could read or write were part of the missionary movement. They were converts, Christian converts, and Ayyankali got help from them, and even his family members were Christian converts. So the point is that Ayyankali, this movement, we had both Christian and Hindu. We cannot say Hindu because Dalits were not Hindus by that time, because they were worshipping the ancestors and something like that. So in the movement, we had both Christians and Hindus, and majority of the leaders who could read and write were the leaders of the movement, SGPS, were Christian converts. So Ayyankali did not want to. Okay, his position on Hinduism, Hinduism. For example, when this Vaikam Satyagraha was going on, he visited a place some 15 miles from the Vaikam temple and attended a meeting of Sadhjana Paribalana Sangham and just returned to his native place in Trivandrum. He was a great leader. By that time, he had become a great leader, and but he did not attend, or he did not demand at any point of time or he did not become the part of the temple entry movement. For him, the concerns are education, access to public spaces, etc. So he did not consider religion as a major thing. And we should also remember that by that time, we had another great intellectual called Poike Lohana, who was from Central Travancore. Okay, he used religion, a subaltern religiosity in that sense. Okay, he used religion to organize people, and it was a kind of critique of Christianity. And he established a religion, drawing something from Christianity. And so, what we see is there are parallel movements, but Ayyankali did not seriously think that conversion could elevate Dalits. Okay, what they actually needed is education and other kind of opportunities. That's why. So, and even in the problems within church is also important. So the Christian converts were again considered as untouchables in Christianity, in the churches. So he did not seriously think that religion can completely change the condition of Dalits. So converting to Christianity is not a what is it? Um, it cannot solve the problems of Dalits. And at the same time, he did not embrace the practices of Hinduism. Even after this temple entry proclamation, he never visited a temple. That's what the biography stresses. So that's what I have to say about that. Then about the Marxist in Kerala. So the one important thing is that by 1930s, Ayyankali's movement disintegrated, and that time, towards the end of 30s, there emerged a new movement, the workers' movement, and the workers' movement was formed by one of the active leaders of Ayyankali's movement. Okay, and then it gradually Ayyankali's movement in a way lost some of its significance because they could not address some of the issues faced by Dalits or the society in general by that time. Okay, in the beginning of the 1900s, it was just education, access to public spaces, etc. But towards the end of the 1930s, what happens was there were discussions about freedom, independence, ending of this princely rules, etc. And they could not take a position on that at that particular time. And the left in Kerala actually tries to kind of appropriate the legacy of Ayyankali by placing him as a leader of the workers' movement. They mainly speak about a strike conducted by Ayyankali in around 1910s. Okay, so this strike is a tool of the workers. Okay, and he belonged to this agricultural workers. So he is basically a workers leader. That's how they are picturing him in the latest works, right from the EMS. Okay, EMS, when he wrote the famous book on Kerala, he did not mention Ayyankali. He stopped discussing the leaders of social renaissance up to the eras. From there, no Dalits were discussed. So that is the position of the left on Ayyankali. And recently, what happened was there is a hall called Victoria Jubilee Town Hall that is located in Travancore, VJT Hall. It was named after Ayyankali recently. Because on the other side, the Hindutva forces are trying to appropriate him by portraying him as a Hindu reformist. And at the same time, these left, they renamed the VJT Hall into Ayyankali Hall. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese. Thank you for your answer. So one more questions. So I have some questions which I'll send you by as a comment there in the paper. For Shakthi, one question which I missed, which was about also what's the role of Dalit unions in IT that someone asked. So one thing, maybe if you can quickly in 1 minute, if you can answer, if you actually have looked at that phenomenon.
I think, yeah, the question about, Dalit cells or SC cells, it's, as far as I know, I haven't heard of any of these, at least as formal organizations in IT companies. I mean, even with IT unions, so far, they haven't been able to become official unions that are recognized by the IT companies. They sort of operate as independent IT unions. I think the bigger question is that really the industry has the capability to, as they count gender and they count, whether someone's from a big city or a tier 2 town or something, they also definitely more than any other entity have the capability, groups like NASSCOM, to also count caste. But then the issue is they say that we don't want to talk about caste because that will lead to caste discrimination, so we can't count caste. So they frame it as a sort of catch-22, and I think this is something that needs to be thought through more. I mean, if you just pretend like it doesn't exist, that doesn't really solve the problem, which I think is what the industry does. So, yeah.
Thank you, Shakti. I think both the presentations, I would say, what's the common theme about Gentle's on Ayyankali. Here Ayyankali was fighting in that period of time against those harsh realities of caste, and now in 21st century, looking at Shakti's paper, that how now we have these very hidden realities that we are kind of interacting with and struggling with. And I think both the paper have it's a great potential to come up with certain kind of conceptualization that how we should deal or understand these everyday practices that often is ignored when we look at the caste reality, especially in these changing modern phenomena. So I congratulate both of you, and I welcome and thank actually all other participants for attending this session. And I hand over to Meena. Thank you all. And thanks Meena and Karthik again for organizing this wonderful conference on caste. Jabi.
Thank you, Gaurav, and thank you for the two very good papers. We would now like to have a slightly longer break and meet again for the book panel discussion, OUB book panel discussion, in which we have Akash Rathore, Kancha Alaya, Kanchana Mahadevan, Matthew Baxter, and I will be hosting it. So see you in about 40 minutes.